Good morning, everyone. This is the Morning Kofefi on Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren, and I'm joined, as always, by the bad Mama Jamma, who is 2 hours ahead of me, so not as tired.
Uh, Hello, guys. Hi, Carter.
You are as
Two
tired?
2 hours ahead doesn't really mean much
Oh,
for
fair.
me. That's true that you have more of a reason. It's like it's way early there.
Keri, I assume, I didn't look at it, but I'm pretty sure that there was a collective mourning for your absence yesterday. I can check the performance
Oh,
of yesterday's video, but I'm sure it was low compared to.
I am sorry, guys, and that will hopefully be very rare that there's a problem. Um, what was I going to say? Oh, I haven't had my kafefe this morning, so I'm a little. And neither of you have you?
No, I have not. Um, yeah, so what's in the news today?
What's in
Um,
the news today?
there's not a lot actually in the news today. There's something I wanted to just mention yesterday. So I guess the Supreme Court is hearing this question of the Trump administration wants to add a citizenship question to the census. And the Supreme Court, and it's being opposed, and the Supreme Court is hearing this now. I
Wait
don't
a
understand
minute. Wait a
why that's
minute.
a problem, but I also don't understand how it's helpful. Like I guess if you're not a legal citizen, but you're in the US legally, you would answer the question. And if you're a citizen, you would answer the question. But if you're an illegal immigrant,
Why would
they
you?
knock on your door and say, "Are you a citizen?" I'm pretty sure you're going to be like, "Uh
Yeah.
huh."
Why
Like,
would you answer that honestly? That doesn't make any sense.
yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a problem with the question being asked. I just don't understand what the hell, like, how do they expect that to work?
Yeah.
And I feel like if you do answer it honestly, you kind of deserve to be deported because you're really dumb.
Well, I don't know.
Like,
This
I
is,
don't really think you should go doing that, but if you're gonna ask that question and they're gonna say, no, 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 I'm here illegally. Hmm.
I don't know if this is a good thing to put this on the census.
I don't know.
Cause I think it kind of normalizes the idea that people on the left are pushing, which, we've talked about before how SJW ideology is all about control because it is authoritarian. And one of the ways they control people is through language. Well, when I was deep in it, I was part of a group that was pushing for the acceptance of illegal immigrants, and a big part of it was that we were pushing to make it taboo to say illegal immigrant, so that people would have to say, we wanted people to say undocumented American.
Oh yeah, no, I know. That's why I
you
don't.
know right. And so that's a trick of language, is people that don't know if sometimes, are these things purposeful? Yes, of course they are. We're out there pushing actively. We would do letter writing campaigns and try to get people, journalists, in trouble for using the wrong terminology. But anyway, what's my point? Again, low on kafefe. No, my point is that this kind of normalizes the idea. It's like on the census, like, well, I'm on the census, the US Census, as an illegal American. Do you know
Well,
what
I
I
don't think
mean?
the question is that. The question is
Okay.
like, are you a citizen?
Right.
Right. So people who have green cards would say no, they're here
Right.
legally. They're just not citizens. Um,
Oh, I
what
see what you're saying.
here's the thing. I understand the reason behind it, which I don't think the founding fathers ever really contemplated. Right. The reason behind it is they used the census to draw up districts and determine populations in areas, which determines electoral college votes and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so, really, they should only be counting citizens, because non-citizens don't vote, which I know is next on Bernie's agenda. But non-citizens don't vote, so it matters when you're kind of dividing up the population and figuring out electoral college votes whether someone's a citizen or not. So I get the question. I understand the reason. But I don't think anyone ever thought we would end up in this situation where there was such a large percentage of the population was. I mean, I'm not saying it's a huge percentage of the total population, but it's a large number of
It's a
people, and
large number of people.
it's a large percentage of the population, as that are illegal immigrants that are here illegally. Um, I like to use illegal immigrants because it is a law and it is broken, and therefore it's illegal. So that makes their status here illegal. They have immigrated illegally. I
Yeah, I
think
mean, language does a lot. Like,
it doesn't
think
mean they're
about it.
bad people or horrible. It doesn't mean it's not.
Right.
I'm not calling them like invalid human or non-human. I'm saying illegal. You're here illegally.
Yeah.
I go to another country and don't go through their customs and cross the border, or and they don't go through their immigration control. I'm illegal.
Right.
Anyway,
No, I agree with you. I think it's a purposeful trick of language to try and because it affects the way you think about things as well. So if you start saying undocumented in American instead of illegal immigrant, you start to forget that. I mean, truly, over time, this is an illegal thing anyway. And that, well, what's wrong with it? Let's get them documented. And it's a way to push support for something, for an ideological position, is to get people to adopt your language. And at the beginning, they may not even agree with your points, but once they start using your language, I think you've already won.
Now, Keri, I'm just going to start collecting 30% of everyone's income, and I'm going to call myself an undocumented IRS agent. And
Undocumented IRS.
I'm just undocumented, but I'm an IRS agent. So
I think people on the left got better at this after there was a book that came out called, I may have mentioned it before, George Lakoff wrote this book called Don't Think of an Elephant. Have you read this?
Yeah.
It's a really good book. It's very thin. You can read it very quickly. He wrote it he wrote it for the left. He's a linguist, and he was writing about how at the time, this is way back in the Wayback Machine, when the left didn't scare me, when the right scared me more. He wrote this book for the left to try to explain how the right was very good at naming things and getting public consensus changed because they got people to get on board. So he gave like No Child Left Behind. They would name things right, that they wanted you to believe it was. And so he kind of laid out in that book, one of the things he was laying out was how Democrats weren't very good at naming at that time. I think they've gotten much better.
I disagree with that. I think the left is constantly saying, oh, the right is so good at this or that. I'm like, you've been doing it forever. I mean, things like the Clean Air Act aren't about clean air. I mean, the left has been great at naming forever.
Oh, okay. Well,
I disagree with the whole, because I think the left says the right is good at, whenever the right is winning in some area, the left just says, oh, they're good at these particular tricks. We should learn them better. And it's like, you've been really good at those tricks. They're just usually the right is catching up to the left in most of these tactics, from what I can tell. Because the right isn't trying to, and that makes sense, right? Because the right isn't trying to generally change things. They're trying to kind of keep things relatively the same the way they are. So they don't need to adopt a new language as much. The left is the ones who's always pushing, all the deconstructionism and postmodernism. That's all leftist. That's all language deconstruction. That's not from the right. Those aren't Christian scholars that are like, hey, maybe this word doesn't, maybe genders don't exist. Let's come up with new words. That's not from the right.
Well, back when I read this book, I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think he was making that case. Okay, sir.
Oh, wait, I wanted to pick on you yesterday, and I didn't. You weren't here. I would like you to defend.
Wait a minute. It's been 7 minutes. I get to do my French press now.
Oh, okay.
No, go ahead.
Have your coffee before I pick on you. Have your coffee.
No, I'm just going to do it while you... my coffee maker's broken, and it takes a very long time, 7 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I should even look up a clip. I'll look up a clip because we're not live, so if it takes a long time.
So you're talking about Bernie and what he said about people voting. I don't need to see the clip, I don't think. Okay. Unless it's funny. Is it funny?
No, Bernie's funny. I just think Bernie's funny generally. Yeah, so I would like you to defend him now. Why should the Boston Marathon bomber vote from jail, Keri? Go.
I don't necessarily think he should. I mean, you mentioned this to me yesterday, and I said I needed time to think about it, and I've had time to think about it. One of my friends on the left was posting about it, and I saw he agrees with Bernie, or at least he was posing the question, why shouldn't we agree with Bernie? It's like, you don't lose your right to, you don't lose some rights while you're in prison. I can't remember the examples he was giving, but But I think I mean, I agree with you. You've committed a crime. You've chosen to take yourself out of society for a while, and at least for the length of time that you're in prison, I don't believe you should be able to vote. I do actually believe that you should be able to vote once you've served your time and you're out of prison, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting argument, and I think you can make a case for that. All right. Well, what rights do you contain? What rights do you keep in prison?
Oh gosh, let me see. I'll look this guy up.
What do you-
Because he had a.
'Cause my
Sometimes I think.
understanding is, like, they kind of own your ass. I guess. Oh, I don't know. You don't have a right to health care anyway.
Oh, you know what he said? You still have a right to practice your religion.
That's it. But not if that involves, like, going to a church that's not in the prison.
That's true.
What? So you have a right to think? Yeah, you can think about voting too. No one's stopping. Like, you can have a vote in the prison among your prisoner friends about, like, this is who we want to vote for. That actually would be fascinating. I'd love to see who the prison population votes for generally.
Well, I think I heard Candace Owens or someone's talking recently about how she thinks they would vote Republican. I don't know. But look at this. So this guy was arguing that the reason why is because the system is broken, that it is impossible to view any question of disenfranchisement outside the context of a history in which white propertied men conspired to prevent everyone else from voting until they had no choice. Mass incarceration.
Not making any sense here. This is not an argument. This is like a history rant.
Mass incarceration is a problem that needs redress. Part of the problem, the racial bias that's baked into the system. So that bias is immoral. And how could it be moral to disenfranchise those caught up in this immoral system? So he goes on to argue basically that anybody who's in prison essentially is there because they live in I mean, I think the argument, if you boil it down to the basic, people are in prison because we live in a white supremacist patriarchy, and you shouldn't punish them further by taking their vote away. That is the SJW argument, I guess.
Well, and to me, when I read that argument, because I don't think they would deny that there are bad people in prison. I think this reveals their collectivist mentality, right? Which is, to them, the question isn't whether serial killers can vote or whether serial killers are in prison. To them, it's like, well, this group is mistreated, and so this group gets to vote. Like,
in prison,
group based, right?
Basically, he's like, if you're black and in prison, you should vote.
I don't, or just in prison because you're by definition. I don't know that they don't go down to usually they're not very interested in, like, talking about individual cases, like should the Boston marathon runner, the runner should vote, the bomber should vote. Yeah, but it's a very collectivist mentality, right? Where it's this is kind of, we believe it's a racist. By the way, I'm not even convinced necessarily that it's a racist prison. Like, I don't think the court systems are racist necessarily. I mean, there's some evidence actually that they are. So, but I don't think it's as big of an issue as they're saying it is. And they're looking at this whole population and saying, like, oh, well, this population is oppressed and disproportionately imprisoned, therefore prisoners should vote. Like, that's a collectivist view of things. That's not, the question should be, should this individual vote? And if this individual is in prison wrongly, then that individual should be not in prison. And that's the problem you should fix. You don't fix the problem by being like, yeah, axe murderers can vote.
I agree.
So
that's a good way of putting it. They're like, this is broken because sometimes people, but actually he's not even arguing that these people haven't committed crimes. He's saying they committed crimes because they live in a white supremacist patriarchy. And
so he's arguing, so I just want to be clear. This guy is arguing that black people have no free will and commit crimes because of the white patriarchy.
Correct.
Wow. So is he called racist by his friends? Because that seems pretty horrible to me. I'm pretty sure that no matter what color of your skin, you have free will and you can make choices.
The further that you get out of SJW ideology, the more obviously racist it is. when you're looking at it, because it's and sexist as well. It's this very condescending kind of racism and sexism, like women, people of color, they don't have enough agency to make their own, to rise up out of anything, or to make their own decisions, or to make, if they have an opinion that disagrees with the ideology, it must be because they're a tool of white men, and they're being used. And it is a really condescending kind of racism and sexism. And yes, that you're not responsible for anything in your life. And, and that, and if you're a woman, the way they express that is like, with that whole stuff about emotional labor, like you shouldn't have to make an argument because you're a woman.
Right. Whoa, it's so tough to be a woman.
It's so tough.
Yeah. The people out, those of us who were never in the social justice tribe, we call that the soft bigotry of low expectations.
Yes.
Which is
that's a great way of putting it.
We all see, the social justice people don't seem to see.
Yeah.
Just like, oh, you're this category. It must be so hard for you.
Yeah. Ugh.
Oh, you're dumb to make your own decision.
By the way, somebody asked me if I was crying before the last morning covfefe, and no, I just sound like this when I first wake up in the morning. And also
on the air, that might be fun.
No. Also, I have a new housemate, and my writing room is right next to their room, and so I try to be quiet, talk quieter.
Are you in your writing room right now? Is that what this is?
This is my writing room.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, is there anything else we need to talk about today? I don't know. There's nothing going on Twitter really. Trump, I guess, retweeted or talked about some. Well, I mentioned this really quickly. So, Jack, how do you say his name? Posobiec or Sobek? I don't know his name.
Sobiec or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Who I'm not a huge fan of. But he's all right. Whatever. He has this news network, whatever, that he's done. I think it's called OANN, and Trump tweeted something about it. And I guess there was this guy who used to work for the CIA who claimed that the UK helped the Obama administration spy on Trump, and Trump was saying something about it on Twitter, and everyone's like, conspiracy theory, blah blah blah, and it probably is, but it's interesting to see how the mainstream media just kind of smears everyone. They're like, they didn't even call the guy. They didn't even call the guy a CIA guy. They called him like a conspiracy theorist, whatever person who used to work for the CIA. And they're like, with absolutely no evidence, he claimed blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And I kind of agree with them. The flip side is, I feel like they spent the legacy media, I got to stop calling them mainstream media, but
right.
They spent the last 2 years doing the exact same thing with the Steele dossier and everything else. And like the absolutely no evidence seems to be not a problem for them. And, people that they agreed with who were saying things they liked weren't conspiracy theorists who used to work for the CIA. They were, CIA experts who blah, blah, blah. It's just the language it's so obvious to me how much of an agenda the legacy media has, and they just aren't letting go. And the Trump thing, their Mueller report didn't help. I think they're just doing what Vox Day says all SJWs do, which is they just double down. They never give up. They just double down. I think we're going to see, there's like still talk of impeachment now.
That's insane.
There's some article like, we should impeach because that would be a good idea. And they're running opinion pieces by like anyone they can find who used to be associated with Trump that's like now saying, the Mueller report there's an article, the Mueller report was my tipping point. I was a Trump transition staffer and I've seen enough. It's time for impeachment. They're trying to find.
You know what? They are in for a rude awakening, because this has been a tipping point, but in the other direction. Like the Kavanaugh thing, it mobilized, it woke up the base, like the people who already support him or the people who are already conservative, whatever, it got them motivated, mobilized. But it's done something beyond just reaching and mobilizing people who already support him. It's pissed off people in the center and people even left of center who recognize this for what a circus it is, manufactured outrage circus, and a waste of time. And if you look at polls, I just saw a poll of the things that the issues Americans are most interested in hearing about from politicians. Russia's way down, like number 15 on the list.
Yeah.
There's the economy, there's healthcare, there's so many other things that they could be talking about, and people are tired of it. And so I think there's going to be a huge wake up call. Like I think the Kavanaugh thing happening when it did got people out to vote right before those midterm elections. Like here in Texas, it was pretty close between Cruz and Beto, and I think the Kavanaugh thing actually mobilized the base and pissed people like me off.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to happen again. And if they don't steal it, I actually think he's going to win with a bigger margin than he did before. What I think they should be investigating is why the previous administration and seemed to be working in coordination with the Democratic campaign to spy on the Republican candidate for president.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to investigate there.
Somebody did interfere or try to interfere in the election.
Right.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the Russians.
Yes, it's the standard projecting thing that the left likes to do. I don't know. The other thing that I think, I was thinking about this. The other thing I think is just tiring to Americans. It's tiring to me, I'll say. Maybe it's tiring to you guys and everyone else. But okay, we went through the Cold War. I grew up. We were in the Cold War. Soviet Union, big enemy. Blah blah blah. Russia is like, they're another country. Yeah, they're kind of the enemy sometimes, but like, they're not this huge threat. And frankly, it was the left that was all in bed with the Soviet Union while they were outright communists the entire time. So like, no one really cares. We all know everyone kind of mucks with each other's elections, and there's propaganda, and like countries have preferences and for who gets elected in other countries and blah, blah, blah. And it's like suddenly the left is so fixated on Russia. It's like, I'm just tired of it. I don't care about Russia. They're a country that we don't agree with on a lot of things, and they have a different agenda. Like, what is this? Like, why is Russia suddenly this radioactive thing? Like, oh, you can't meet with anyone from Russia. You can't talk to anyone from Russia. Don't take any information from the Russians. I'm like, do we say the same thing about the Venezuelans or the, Cubans or the Japanese or like French? Like, what the hell? Why are they so fixated? And that's because they think that that's like the only vector that they can use to get, to attack Trump. But of course, they don't use it. It's not like, okay, right next to Russia is the Ukraine. Do we talk about Hillary's Uranium One deal and the Ukraine? No, we do not. Do we talk about the Clinton campaign's ties to Russia? No. Right? Russia's not a problem then. Russia's only a problem if there's some way that it's connected to the Trump campaign. It's just so, I think mainstream people, I think regular people, even if they don't think about it and see it intellectually, I think emotionally they see through this stuff and they're just like, really? Why is your bee in a bonnet about Russia? Who the fuck cares?
Yeah.
Right? Facebook is like censoring conservatives. Can we talk about that? Election interference?
Yeah.
But
they don't, I don't know. It's I think you're right. The average person is tired of it and they're ready for politicians to talk about something meaningful or something that actually impacts their lives. I saw somebody the other day in a thread say, it was somebody like me on the left who was saying, this is why I'm seriously considering voting for Trump. I can't remember what it was, but this person's like, as someone on the left, I'm seriously considering voting for Trump. And these other people on the left got upset and accused this other guy or girl, I can't remember, of lying and they're delusional. They're like, nobody on the left would ever vote for Trump. It's like, you guys are in for a huge wake up call. I personally know a lot of people from walk away, and not all of them have walked away to the independent section like me. A lot of them have walked away straight to the Republican Party. Um, and to be delusional about it. And then one person in the thread said, well, if it's true that you're planning on voting for Trump, I guess it's something about how it's just because his policies don't threaten your very life like they do mine. And then they go to that hyperbole a lot. They're like, Trump has threatened my very life. I'm like, I very much doubt that. And that kind of hyperbole turns people off too. It's like, quit lying. Just talk about real stuff. Like, threatened my very right to existence, or.
Yeah, no, I think we are in for a wake-up call. And the Democrats seem to just be getting farther and farther to the left and more in line with social justice ideology, right? Bernie is doing it, and like the main candidates, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie, Kamala Harris, Beto, like they're all crazy left. And that guy, I keep forgetting his name. It's like Bootleg or whatever. I don't remember his name.
It's like got the word "but" in it.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
He also is like a whole bunch of crazy like Green New Deal, literally confiscate semi-automatic weapons, which is like almost every weapon. I think actually, if someone gets in and demands first, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I'll say it anyway because it's an unsafe space. If I get arrested, you know why. If they actually try and confiscate regular semi-automatic weapons and come after and demand that you turn them in, don't. You'll never get them back, even if it gets struck down by the Supreme Court. I mean, I think they'll have a war on their hands. I think there'll be at least a lot of suicides happening and like people hiding crap. Like
people will not turn them over. No. And I never used to understand, because even when I was a liberal when I was more like SJW liberal or leftist who was shooting, I didn't understand people on the right who didn't want a national registry or database of people who purchased. I'm like, but at the time, I thought it was common sense. We should have a list of everyone.
What if the stormtroopers need to take our weapons away?
Yeah. See, now I understand why. Now I understand why they oppose it. I'm like, oh, because they want to be like in New Zealand, for example, they are now doing this buyback thing, and you have a certain amount of time to sell the government your gun, or actually, somebody pointed out, buy your gun from yourself, because the government's buying your gun with tax money that you paid. So you have a certain amount of time to sell your gun to the government, and if you don't, you can be fined or thrown in jail, right? And that they're able to do that. They know you have it because they have that national registry. So I understand now why people don't want the registry.
You know who I want to get on the show to talk with is the 3D printing gun guys, because that I think is that might save Second Amendment. There's been I've seen a lot of cool 3D printed gun stuff. You can get barrels and slides and those kind of things. Those aren't actually those aren't tracked. Those aren't registered, right? So it's the frame that the government tracks. The part that the government tracks is the frame, and the frame can be printed with plastic, right? Glocks have a plastic frame. So you can buy barrels and you can buy slides all day long on the internet without any repercussions. And then you can just print, you can 3D print receivers at home.
Yeah, they're never going to be able to. I mean, it's impractical, first of all. Almost every gun is a semi-automatic. And there are so many.
That when they hear semi-automatic, the people that vote for these crazies on the left, when they hear semi-automatic, they think like fully automatic Rambo machine gun. That they have no clue what a semi-automatic weapon is.
They don't. And actually, the things that would help, we should do a whole episode about gun stuff, because going after so-called assault weapons is such a like even when I worked on the show Totally Biased, even when I was firmly in the SJW world, I opposed that, and I was the only person in my little echo chamber who opposed that. But I oppose it because it's completely cosmetic. The only reason you're going after those rifles is because they look scary and they're black. They're responsible for a fraction, like a percentage of gun deaths.
Right.
I
Yeah.
forget, it's like 2% or something, and that's all rifles. That's not just the black ones that look scary. It's all the hunting rifles, every bolt action, put them all together. They're responsible for such a small fraction of gun deaths per year, but you want to be able to pat yourself on the back and say that you did something when actually all you're doing is laying the groundwork to then take away handguns. But if you really did want to like do so, that's why I know their motives are wrong, because if they really want to reduce gun violence, the majority of deaths are handgun deaths. So they would go after handguns, but they're too afraid to do that outright first, right?
Right.
So, but something that would really help is to close the, so currently it's up to the state to decide if they report mental health records to, is it NICS? And do you know about this, right?
Yeah,
Or
although
a
I
little?
think we're going to start disagreeing, but go
Oh,
ahead.
okay. Oh, we might start good. Well, so it is illegal. I've seen people on the left sometimes say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun if you're a domestic violence record." I'm like, you're not. There are certain things that are already illegal. You're not allowed to buy a gun
Right.
if you.
It's the background check, the criminal background check that they do already catches you if you're
Right. So the background check system, for people who don't know, it's called NICS or NCIS. NICS.
NICS, National Instant Criminal Background Check System.
Right. So one of the other things you're not allowed to do is it's illegal to buy a gun if you've been adjudicated as mentally unfit, or if you've been hospitalized in a mental hospital against your will. And so, but see, it's up to the state to decide if they report those records or not. So, for example, the Virginia Tech shooter, who until recently I think was the biggest mass murderer. I think he killed 30 something people at Virginia Tech with handguns, by the way. He had been deemed mentally unfit by a judge. If he had been in the system, if Virginia at the time had been a state that reported those records to NICS, he would not have been able to legally purchase the guns that he legally purchased. Now, I'm not saying he wouldn't have found another way to get them. I'm just saying, why make it easy for someone? And Texas is a state that reports, for example, it chooses to report those records. I think every state should be forced to report those records. Is this where we're going to disagree?
Uh-huh.
The ACLU disagrees with me, by the way. The ACLU believes it's a matter of individual privacy that you shouldn't.
I agree with the ACLU on this issue. In fact, I'll say something possibly more radical. I don't think there should be any checks whatsoever for purchase of a firearm.
Whoa.
You just argued that the Boston bomber, if he gets out of jail, should vote. And my argument will be, if you get your voting rights and every other right restored for, quote, serving your time to society, that includes your right to self-defense and owning guns.
Interesting. Okay, so wait, when he gets out of jail, do you think he should be able to vote?
I don't think he should get out of jail.
Right, but when people, let's say when someone gets out of jail, are there voting rights? Okay, and you think that they're the rights to buying a firearm?
I think certain people, like, it's hard because actually, I ultimately I'm an anarchist, so I don't actually want jails and all this. Like things would be different. But if we just go with if we roll back my anarchy a little bit and go with like minimalist government, yeah, there are jails for violent criminals. And if you don't think that they are fit to be walking around with a gun, then they're not fit to be part of society. There's plenty of ways to kill people, and you have rights, and your right to self-defense doesn't come from the government. Now, if you want to argue that they've given up their right to self-defense, fine. And you want to say, well, I'm going to replace the prison system with like, you can no longer buy guns. But the problem with that, Keri, is it necessitates an entire apparatus whereby the government pays attention to who buys guns and knows who buys guns and has to ask questions like, well, are you fit? Are you this? Blah, blah, blah.
No, it doesn't. It simply requires the states to report those mental health records.
Which requires a system.
To report it to NICS. If NICS They know. And
I see
right.
a system.
No, but my point is there's not some separate apparatus of judging each individual person, like in Minority Report, like, are you going to commit a crime? These records already exist. Just
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm saying that apparatus, we're talking about in the abstract here. And
okay.
I'm saying, like, if you're going to say, well, when he gets out of jail, he only gets some of his rights, and one of the ones he loses is gun rights. And you could say this about other rights too. You could say this about freedom of speech, or you could say this about voting, which is not a natural right, but whatever. We'll use the word right. Then you have to you need an apparatus to police that. Right now, we do have an apparatus to police that to some extent. Right now, we have the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. States have their own rules. There is apparatus to support that. I'm opposed to the apparatus to support it because the apparatus will, I guarantee you, grow bigger and more intrusive over time, because that's what apparatuses of governments do. So it'll just get worse. And it always starts with something.
Is it apparati? I don't know.
Apparati, yeah, sure. It always starts with something small and easy, like, hey, should this mass murderer have a machine gun? And everyone's like, well, no. I'm like, all right, well, fine, keep him in jail.
Hey, well, speaking of which, machine guns, automatic weapons, not legal, except, you have to have a very good reason and have no one understands that. But what do you think, they should be legal? Absolutely. I don't. You do?
Yeah.
Automatic weapons.
Absolutely.
Okay, we totally disagree on that too.
Yeah, because you need all the weapons required to fight a civil war against your government.
I hear you, but yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we finally found a place where we butt heads.
Yeah. I think it should all be legal, and if you'll notice, most of these shootings take place in gun-free zones. So, I think it's not impossible to stop someone who's crazy with a gun. You just need a gun.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll say is the impracticality of this. Look, as 3D printing gets better, you can't stop the signal, right? You can't stop 3D printing of guns. Like, that information will be shared. Those files will be out. They'll be on the blockchain. They'll be in torrents. You can't stop that. And look, in another 20 years, we'll probably have, we have already 3D metal printing. In another 20 years, it'll probably be decent enough that it can rival a forged part. So you can print the slide in barrels. Maybe it'll be a little longer than 20 years, but it's also just impractical to try and control. And so I'm much more of the mindset, like, don't control it. Leave it alone. Right? If an actual serial killer with a machine gun starts to use his machine gun anywhere in a normal society, he'll get a couple rounds off and then he'll die. And that will be the end of the mass murderer, because someone else will be armed. Right? I would carry all the time if I could. It's not that hard. I used to carry all the time.
Interesting. I'm carrying right now. I'm kidding.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm in my house. I am carrying in my house. But that's beside the point. It's not that hard to carry. And
it is in LA.
No, I just mean, like, logistically.
Right.
So, if we lived in a society where guns weren't a big deal, which they're not, I think we would have a safer society, frankly. But that's not even my goal. My goal is individual rights. So my goal is, like, I get the government out of the last entity you want knowing anything about who has what gun is the government.
Well, I don't think there should be a national registry, but I don't need to repeat it. We disagree on that. I do think the states should be
We'll have a great debate some other time. We've gone long.
Okay, goodbye.
So
goodbye.
We'll have a good debate.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye, everyone. Oh, follow us on Twitter at Unsafe Space, and subscribe to Unsafe Space on YouTube, and go to unsafespace.com and do all those things.
And tell people about us.
tomorrow morning, and we'll try and have more energy. I feel like we were kind of low energy today, but we
Yeah.
talked about guns and disagreed. So,
Okay.
yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye.